Welcome back to another episode of Sinclair Schools. Today, I'm going to walk you through the actual process of voting on the school budget. All of the work that has gone into presenting, designing, creating, and supporting this budget ultimately comes down to the decision of the voters. In order to understand that voting process, we're going to walk through how voting will occur and what the actual warrant articles mean so that you can cast the most informed vote for you, your family, and your community. The state of Maine requires that school budget warrant articles be discussed and adopted in an open town meeting. This year, this open meeting will occur on Saturday, May 17th at 10 a.m., beginning at the Edgecombe Town Hall. Voters must be present for the entirety of voting to vote on all of the articles. However, while school budget warrant articles must be discussed and adopted in an open town meeting, there is an option for something called a budget validation referendum, or a BVR. This is an additional step for voters to cast a written ballot vote to support or reject a school budget after it is adopted in an open meeting. While Edgecombe does not currently utilize a BVR, and there will not be a BVR specific to this spring's budget, we do have an opportunity to decide on whether we wish to add a budget validation referendum for the next 3 years. So, on May 17th, one of the referendum votes that you can cast is either for or against the addition of a budget validation referendum or an additional step in the school budgeting process. The results of that vote will take place next year and will apply for the next 3 years. We'll start with a brief outline of the warrant articles. School budget warrant articles are written so that the voters in a municipality authorize elected officials to raise, appropriate, and expend funds for education. Raising funds means to tax local property owners. Appropriating funds means to set those funds aside for a certain purpose. And expending funds actually means to spend them. Warrant articles are written so that they begin with the needed expenses and then work backwards to fund the agreed upon expenses. Here is an example of some warrant article language. It is written in fairly specific legalese. However, if you take a moment to notice, each of these warrant articles hinges on either expending or appropriating funds of money. Rather than read through every article as written, my intent is to simply explain in simpler language the purpose of each warrant article. Here are the warrant articles that will appear in the school budget portion of the vote this spring. The first article will be to elect a moderator. That moderator will run the remainder of the meeting according to Robert's Rules of Order. The 2nd through 12th warrant articles are all designed to allow for the expending of funds in the 11 designated cost centers. Article number 2 is to authorize the expending of $2,234,647 for regular instruction. Regular instruction is the state-designated cost center for all regular general education. This includes teacher salaries, ed tech, substitute salaries, benefits, classroom and instructional supplies, and professional development. Warrant Article number 3 allows for the expenditure of funds for special education in the amount of $847,391. This includes the special education teachers and ed tech's salary and benefits. This also includes the special services costs as designated by the AOS budget, classroom and program materials, and programs such as speech, pathology, psychological evaluations, physical therapy, occupational therapy. This cost center also includes the tuition and fees for out-of-district services, as well as transportation to such services, and any needed professional development. Warrant Article number 4 is another state-mandated cost center. This one covers career and technical education. For Edgecombe Eddy, this is going to be in the amount of $0. This is because vocational instructional programs occur at the secondary level. So our students at the secondary level interested in accessing these programs do so through their high school. Warrant Article number 5 allows for the expenditure of funds for other instruction. This is in the amount of $3,451. Other instruction includes co-curricular and extracurricular programs. And for us, most specifically, this is the Chewonki Outdoor Encampment Program for our sixth graders. Warrant Article number 6 is to expend funds for student and staff support in the amount of $122,177. This includes the salary for guidance counselor, social work, the nurse, and other benefits, as well as any costs associated with student testing, computer hardware, and software. Warrant Article number 7 allows for the expenditure of funds in the cost center for system administration in the amount of $155,817. This amount represents Edgecombe's portion of the AOS budget, including all of the central office business, legal fees, annual audit services, and so forth. This is an area that has shown a significant change this year. The AOS board made the decision to move the director of technology position into an AOS-wide position. This position is thus paid through this line item in the budget. In order to incrementally introduce this change to local budgets, the decision was made that half of the cost of this would move into local budgets this year, and the other half will move into local budgets next year. And then we anticipate that the cost of this cost center will remain steady. This decision was made to best meet the needs of all of the schools across the AOS and in acknowledgement of the fact that the bulk of the work done by this position has shifted from a building specific role to one that has equal benefits across the AOS. Warrant Article number 8 authorizes the expenditure of funds for school administration in the amount of $227,727. This is the building principal and administrative assistant salary and benefits, as well as all of the additional front office needs. Warrant Article number 9 authorizes expenditure for transportation and buses in the amount of $190,667. Specifically, this covers the salaries and benefits of bus drivers, as well as the vehicle's maintenance and fuel. Warrant Article 10 authorizes expenditures for facilities maintenance in the amount of $341,776. This covers the custodial staff salaries and benefits, as well as supplies needed for cleaning and repair to the buildings, and any costs incurred or anticipated for minor and short-term building and grounds projects. Warrant Article number 11 authorizes the expenditure for debt service. This would be reserved for the repayment of a loan for something like school construction. Edgecombe has none at this time, so this amount is zero. Warrant Article number 12 allows for the expenditure for all other expenditures. This is in the amount of $35,000, which represents the cost of our school lunch program. At this time, in search of efficiency and cost savings, Edgecombe Eddy continues to bring food in from the Booth Bay Harbor CSD food services programs. A couple of warrant articles later, we will get to Article number 16, which is the total school budget summary. This is the final warrant article that addresses expenditures, and it authorizes the expenditures of up to the amount of all of the previous cost centers combined. In this case, this is an amount of $4,158,653. Once expenditures have been authorized, the next step is for a municipality to determine how the funds needed to meet those expenditures will be raised and appropriated. Articles 13, 14, and 15 allow for those monies to be raised through taxes and then appropriated for educationally designated purposes. In order to understand why this vote is done in multiple steps, we need to speak for a moment about the state of Maine's funding formula for the EPS essential programs and services. It is this funding formula that determines the amount of state subsidies that municipalities will receive. Municipalities must raise through taxes a certain amount of money in order to receive the state subsidy at all. That amount is called the state and local EPS funding allocation. And again, it is determined by the EPS funding formula. Any money raised above that amount is referred to as additional local funds, and those two amounts are voted on separately. So, for Edgecombe, warrant article number 13 is asking to raise through taxes the amount of money that the state EPS funding formula says Edgecombe must raise in order to receive our state subsidy. That is $1,773,575. The same warrant article is also authorizing the appropriation or setting aside of that amount of money plus the state subsidy for the purposes of educational funding. So that warrant article has a second number in it, which is the amount of appropriation. This is in the shape of $2,237,697.55. Warrant Article number 14 raises and appropriates any funds necessary for debt services, and again, at this time, we have none. Warrant Article number 15 authorizes the raising through taxes and appropriation of additional local funds needed to meet the rest of the budgeted expenditures. That amount is $1,409,847.25. The state requires a written ballot for this article and also requires that we inform voters that this amount exceeds the EPS funding formula by a cost which is the above amount minus the cost of food service. It's also important to take a moment and pause in recognition of the fact that the total amounts being raised are less than the total expenditures due to the budgeted use of tuition revenue. At this time, we are finished with the process of deciding how to pay for public education in Edgecombe. But we are not done. Articles 17, 18, and 19 do not involve raising money through taxes or allocating funds that aren't already set aside for educational purposes. This is why these articles are in a separate category. They are here for voter oversight. Article 17 authorizes the school to spend state and federal funds and grants. Article 18 authorizes the school to spend any additional state subsidy funds if they were to occur. And Article 19 allows and authorizes the school to move existing funds between cost centers to meet unanticipated needs without going over the overall expenditure permitted by the voters. The final articles to be voted on during the open town meeting portion of our budget presentation are Articles 20 and 21. These also do not involve raising money through taxes or allocating funds that aren't already set aside for educational purposes. They do involve reallocating or appropriating funds from the unassigned fund balance into specified reserve accounts. This is why they are in a separate category. If you have watched any of my previous videos, you might know a little bit about the reserve accounts and their purposes, but rest assured you'll learn a little bit more on the next slide. Article 20 allows the school to appropriate up to $100,000 of unspent funds into the capital reserve account and then to expend those funds as needed over the remaining fiscal year. Article 21 allows the school to appropriate up to $125,000 of unspent funds into the student expense reserve account and then expend those funds as needed with the additional approval of the select board. I wanted to take a moment and share a little bit of the history of the reserve accounts in Edgecombe. Reserve accounts serve a variety of purposes. Primarily, they allow for two fiscally responsible actions. They allow for schools to set aside funds for non-specifically anticipated events without having to increase anticipated expenditures on a regular basis, thus bringing our anticipated expenses more in line with actual anticipated needs. They also allow for funds to be set aside in a mechanism that can pay for costs that bridge from one fiscal year to the next fiscal year. The voters of Edgecombe established the capital reserve account for the school in 2020, and at that time funded it up to $230,000. It was additionally provided up to an additional $50,000 by the voters in 2023. What was originally referred to as the contingency fund account was established by voters under that name in 2021, at which time it was funded up to $140,000. It was renamed the Student Expense Reserve Account in 2023. Which brings us to the spring of 2023. In the spring of 2023, both of these reserve accounts had an opportunity to work exactly as they were intended. That spring, Edgecombe Eddy had some significant plumbing challenges with the well and water systems at the school, as well as some unanticipated budget needs brought about by increased and unanticipated student need. In the spring of 2023, the Capital Reserve Account funds were accessed with specific permission of the voters and the Select Board to address unbudgeted expenses related to the well, and the Student Expense Reserve Account was used with specific permission of voters and the Select Board to address the unbudgeted and unanticipated student needs. Both of these accounts worked exactly as designed and were able to avoid mid-year tax increases. The current status of the reserve accounts is complicated. In the spring of 2024, voters approved appropriating up to $150,000 to be placed into the Capital Reserve Account. And at the same time, voters approved an amended article appropriating up to $50,000 into the Student Expense Account. The voters at this time granted the school board the authority to appropriate these funds. However, the school board will not authorize such an appropriation until we receive the 2023 and 2024 audits, and we have not received either of those at this time. So, in this year's budget warrant articles, you will see that both of these reserve accounts are listed as having an existing balance of zero. This is why. Finally, a little perspective. The Edgecombe School Board administration and staff fully support this proposed budget as a balance between the needs of students and the pressures on taxpayers. The school-based costs in the proposed budget are similar to those of surrounding towns, and the overall budget shows a lower cost per pupil than many surrounding towns, due in part to tuition revenue. We are incredibly proud of this budget. Please remember that these school budget warrant articles will be discussed and voted on in an open town meeting on Saturday, May 17th at 10 a.m., beginning at the Edgecombe Town Hall. Please encourage attendance, get and share information from the Edgecombe Eddy School Board, and watch this and other presentations at the Sinclair Schools YouTube channel listed below. Thank you so much for your time, your patience, and your support of public education.